I'll start with a relatively easy one, and then if I may, I have some harder questions for you.
Let's start there.
So it seems like the strategy that I heard is very similar to, somewhat similar connotations to the strategy we're talking about. You talked about the core and expanding from the core. How did you determine that that was a good way forward for TeliaSonera?
So, you think it's an easy question because you are not new in your company, but no, so joking apart, I only joined 6 months ago, so the strategy had been in the works for some time. But to give you a little bit feeling of the journey of TeliaSonera, we had a new CEO appointed 1st of September last year. So when Johan Dennelin came on board, they addressed it first from the customer challenge and then coming up with the strategy and then put a whole new operating model in place, a whole new organization, and as part of that I came into the organization. But the strategy really came from, and I think it's probably not completely surprising maybe that we ended up in pretty close places, came from what are the investments we have made and what will require to deliver on some of those data points I showed you in the first slide. So the need for that networks, superior networks and build out and continued investments, it's just going to accelerate. But of course, it also has to monetize somewhere.
Right.
So it's creating monetization on that investment, but also finding adjacencies, because the convergence is happening.
Absolutely.
Between IT and telco, but I was also speaking about other convergence between industries, convergence between B2C and B2B, because there are no borders any longer, and I think that's a driving factor for coming to that conjoined strategy.
Sounds like we've organized what we were going to say beforehand.
We never met before.
Okay, so a little bit of a harder question, and that came up yesterday, and I think it is good to try to address it. We have talked about Tomorrow Transform. That's the focus of the Business Innovation Forum, and we've talked about how all industries will transform. And one of the questions we had yesterday is, what is the future of the telco in this transformation? And does the role become more important, less important, as we see every industry digitalized?
Yeah, so that is a very hard question. And of course, everybody in telco would like to say that the role will become more important, but it's a tricky question because we don't know exactly what the future holds. And I think that's where you need to always, my view is you have to always keep your view on the external environment and what is going to create value for the customer, because it's not a given. It is definitely not a given, and there's so many different players. If you think of the slide I had about how we're moving on that axe, there's so many different players who are coming close to one space. So what role will the OTT players play? What role will we be able to play? What role will the financial institutions play when everything becomes digitalized? And we, of course, believe that staying really close to our customers, continuing and investing, but also finding ways of innovating in smaller pockets than maybe traditionally we've done, we will be able to play a role in really creating that value for the customer. But at the end of the day, the customer will decide who creates the best value.
Absolutely. Questions from the audience? This question here.
Hello, that's Ericsson from Helsinki, Finland. I have actually two questions if you allow. First, I'd like to hear how you view the data cables and capacity here in the Nordics. Do we have capacity on the cables and networks and redundancy for example, data centers and so on? And the second question would be, how do you see the question of network neutrality that should be totally open, or maybe if it's not so, in which kind of cases it might be needed to prioritize traffic?
Yeah, it's hot topics if we start from the end. So the net neutrality question. So it's first of all, my viewpoint and the viewpoint of TeliaSonera is that providing an open internet and continuing to invest behind the networks to enable that, it's vital for how our economies develop. It's vital for everything. It's so connected to how our economies develop. So of course we believe in that. Now, there are a couple of other angles to this, of course, that it takes enormous investments to do what we are setting out to do. So how we monetize it and how that gets done in that changing world, which is not the same as it was 2 years ago, it's not completely obvious. When it comes to, and there may be some, somebody took the question about how do you ensure that all the critical services actually, I always have to be able to call 911. What about if I can't call 911 because everybody's downloading Spotify music? Of course we have to ensure that we can call 911 on our networks, for example. So we have to do those things. The third thing I think is important, and what our viewpoint is that because it's changing so much, because we don't know what it will look like 2 years, it's very hard to firmly regulate something. However, it doesn't mean that we should not have dialogues and should not agree on these things. We believe there are dialogues between regulators and the industry that is extremely important. And we believe that if anybody here is using their position to drive this in a way that it's not beneficial for the customers and the markets, then that needs to be addressed. But to do firm regulation in an industry that we don't actually know what that's going to look like, we think is very, very tricky. And to look at it purely from a European base, we think it's a similar situation if you look at it from our EU conversations. And now I forgot the first question. It's about the data point. In
the Nordics.
In the Nordics specifically. I think I'm going to have to come back to you on, if you leave me we'll come back to you on that question. Happy to.
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you. If I could just pick up a small follow-on on the net neutrality.
Yes.
And an end-to-end question. So you said, and I quite agree, that it's difficult to do firm regulation in such a fast-changing environment. What's the alternative to firm regulation? Woolly regulation is not good. So what's the alternative is question one. Question two is some of what you described, and you didn't go into a whole lot of detail about what you're doing in end-to-end, but some of what you described was quite similar to some of what Ericsson said this morning. Are you competing? Are there awkwardnesses there, or how does that work?
Okay, so let's maybe we'll close off on the net neutrality conversation. So I think there are. I think each country is addressing that a little bit different, and then I think EU has one approach, and now there's a new minister, so that might change. But for example, in Sweden, and there are probably some people here who knows this better than me, who work specifically in Sweden, the PTS are inviting the different parties in the industries to have these conversations, to agree the principles, to agree on what this should look like, without necessarily taking that into firm regulation. So we believe there is that way of doing it, and to agreeing what those guiding principles actually are for how we should deal with it. And that is very important. I think the dialogue of that is very important. And also because there's so many different players. It's not just, of course, the traditional ones like we are maybe, but all the new players that we need to deal with. So I think that's important.
And it's to understand the issues as well.
Exactly, to understand the issues. And I think that's a continuous dialogue, because those issues will evolve as new services come to market that we can't even predict today. And I think that's the whole nature of our industry and the evolution and innovation. And then on M2M, and I'm sorry I was not here to hear what Ericsson said, but Ericsson is a partner of us in that, and it's an Ericsson platform that we have built M2M on. So we have very close collaboration. But I would say that, and I talked to that in an interview before, but I would say that because there's so many, I really think when we talk about connecting people, at the end of the day there is only so many people to connect. When we talk about connecting devices, it's infinite. It can be anything that we can connect in the future. And we don't know what those connection points are. It's going to be our innovation that drives that, and others. And I think there we're going to see brand new ecosystem and brand new partners. And again, if you talk about what's not defined, that's not completely defined, because that will be evolving. So we might still be partners 2 years from now on M2M, but maybe it will be different. There will be different partnership points as well compared to what we have today, which is maybe more coming from where we are coming from.
And if I may add to that, we didn't cover the machine-to-machine topic specifically this morning, but it's not by chance that we are saying in some respects similar things. We have a very important initiative that we are trying to evolve with other customers as well. We are working very, very closely with TeliaSonera on innovation. And the objective there is really to look at how do we, as an industry, innovate. So we are doing a pilot with TeliaSonera, and the objective there is how do we innovate to create new opportunities within the ecosystem. And of course, the same kind of potential areas for collaboration and areas for growth are coming up because we are having these conversations together. And we are looking at these opportunities together. So we are a partner, but as you say, there are areas that we will maybe not be in the future.
Yeah.
But of course, our objective is to make the overall industry successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So other questions? I see one over there.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne from Telecom Review. I'm going to try to articulate this as I formulated it in my head. But, okay, so I'm assuming that one of the best business models in this era of transformation would be for to work on scale. So where you monetized all of the data going through your networks instead of just charging per service or per function. I'm assuming that. Do you think that that would mean that there would be fewer telcos in the future because they consolidate? Would the market be better catered to by large telcos, or would small telcos still have space to operate?
So I think there's a question of what's the value so I think there are many parts of that question actually. There's a value monetization of data. What's the value for customers in the network of data? And then I think there's a question of consolidation in some markets maybe of operators, which is I think also market dependent. And then I think it's about customers' expectations on us, all of us in industry. And if we start from the latter, I think the customer expectation in the future will be they expect a seamless experience wherever they are. And that's going to put more challenges on us. So whatever network they're using from us, whether it's the mobile network or a fiber network or a Wi-Fi, I think customers will expect a seamless experience. And that's challenging, to be very, very honest, because how does that get monetized? And how do we, technically, but commercially, what does that commercial model exactly look like? But when we talk about our commitment to the customers, it is to let the customer, on their terms, decide how they want to operate with us. And that's how we challenge ourselves to think about it. Then I think in terms of data monetization, and that's another interesting, really, we're in the middle of that interesting shift where voice is decreasing in terms of revenue shift and the data is increasing. And how do customers see value from this? Is the value to actually be able to get Spotify everywhere? Or is the value never to have to worry about that I'm running out of gigabytes to do what I need to do? And that's going to be depending on the customer groups. So I think we'll see more catering to the target markets on their on choice. You saying that you would want to buy this or that because that's your interest area. Teenagers maybe want to do this, a businessman something else, etc. So I think there'll be more. I think we'll see more options basically based upon that value. Now, when it comes to consolidation, which is another interesting question, I think, if you look at the world, the markets look so different. So I just moved from Boston to here a few months ago. And in the US, you have this gigantic market with 4 operators. And what happens to all of you when you landed here, if you looked at your roaming, you probably got the choice of 4 operators as well, which is a much smaller market. Right. You can go to even smaller markets, and there's still 4 operators. So I think in some markets, I think there will be consolidation, not so much maybe for that reason as it is for what we just talked about. It takes a lot of investments to be able to deliver on that connected lifestyle that the consumer will expect from us. So for that reason, I think you'll see markets, smaller markets especially, with more consolidation. Whereas in the bigger markets, I wouldn't understand why you would need to consolidate in the US, to be honest.
But there are still discussions.
But there's still discussions in the US, which is a very different environment from the European environment, for sure.
Absolutely. There's a question in the back.
Hi there. We heard from Ericsson this morning about $5 billion in R&D that gets put by Ericsson into innovation.
Into R&D.
R&D. How much does TeliaSonera do on R&D? And in particular, do you think that service providers should do more of their in-house development, particularly on services and applications, rather than, if you like, outsource it to their vendors or the standards bodies?
Yeah. So we just, if I divide them in 2, we just had our Capital Markets Day a few weeks ago, where we actually shared with the analysts that our objective to go on this journey is to invest more than we would have done otherwise in our evolution. So typically we would have invested 15% of our service revenues in CapEx, and we're now saying that we're adding up to 16-17% to be able to do this transformation. So more money basically going behind the transformation that Ericsson is also talking about. And when it comes to your second question, I believe it is actually both. I think it is, we of course have internal development and we have internal focus, but we also work with partners, and I think it's extremely important. And even more so in this world that I'm now describing to you, because you need companies coming from different perspectives, and you need the inspiration, and you need a different starting point for some of the services and applications you need to develop, whereas we come from one starting point at this point. So I do believe it's a combination of both.
Thank you very much, Helene.
Thank you.
Very inspirational.
Thank you. Pleasure
Ola?
to be here.